Hey everyone, this is Pastor Jeremy checking in for our Wednesday midweek devotion. I'm recording this on a Monday afternoon and it is cool. This is the weather we should have probably been having in February, March when it was 70 degrees, but hopeful that this is short-lived and we'll be back with some warmer weather soon. I know that I'm looking forward to planting stuff in the garden, and you got to wait till, at least Derby Day or Mother's Day, so it's the next 2 weekends to get that going. It's a busy time for everyone, isn't it not? Getting ready for the end of the semester. I know the college is finishing up classes, and we're making plans for celebrating our graduates here, and looking forward to hosting baccalaureate for Williamsburg school on the 17th. And so it's just a lot of things going on, and it's good stuff, but we're all pushing through. So I hope that you are getting a chance to breathe a little bit as we work through this time, and we look forward to summer. Tonight I will be using our daily lectionary reading, and it'll be in Acts chapter 16, verses 11 through 15, and we're going to be reading the story of Lydia and her conversion in Philippi. And it says this. It says, "From Troas we put out to sea and sailed straight for Samothrace, and the next day we went on to Neapolis. From there we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony in the leading district of the city of Macedonia, and we stayed there several days. On the Sabbath we went outside the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. One of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira, should have practiced these cities' names, named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. She was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. When she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. 'If you consider me a believer in the Lord,' she said, 'come and stay at my house.' And she persuaded us." We don't really know a whole lot about Lydia outside of what we see in this particular text, but nevertheless, she is inevitably shows up in Women of the Bible kind of Bible studies and things like that, which really says more about the way that we approach Scripture. But it is important just to pay attention a little bit to some of the things that are happening in this story with Lydia, and why it's interesting and important for the way that we do church that she had her story told and that she was named in this time. So what do we know about her from this text? She was wealthy because she was the dealer in purple cloth. Purple cloth took a lot of work to get. It was one particular plant, or then something with shellfish in the ocean, and all this kind of stuff. But it's hard to get. It was hard to do. And so to be a dealer in purple cloth would have meant that she was wealthy, and she had established this business. Some said that maybe perhaps she was a widow, but sometimes we just assume things that we don't know for sure. It could just be that she was really good at business and that she had this calling. And nevertheless, we know that she was, obviously a female, that she was wealthy, and that she was a worshiper of God. And based on her, where she was from, this would have been unusual. She would have been expected to be in more of a polytheistic setting, but she had turned away from the polytheistic way of living and was instead pursuing following God, whichever way that would have meant. And so two things that really stand out in this story. One I've already made note of, but the fact that we acknowledge that there is a woman in the story who is head of a household, helping everyone to be baptized, and that she was able to invite these folks, Paul and Silas, and Timothy, to be a part of this story. So you see, Lydia is there, and she invites them in, and this would have been unexpected. First of all, for a female to be in business, to have wealth, to be able to kind of do things on her own, but then also to be able to invite these men in to her household during the Sabbath. And so we can't run past this, and I think it's important maybe to even note that when they're telling the story, it's just a fact. It's not like, well, first we have to explain why this is okay, or this is what's going on. We see pretty early on in the story of the church that women are treated equally. Paul would say later there's neither male nor female, but we're seeing this equal treatment from this moment. It wasn't a, well, okay, Lydia, we're going to ask you to maybe go find some men who can actually step in for you. We're glad that you're offering this. And it wasn't a, well, we need you to step aside and let others do it. We just see that she was included. And I think the fact that that is happening pretty early on would show the heart of trying to understand this new way of following Jesus. We are breaking so many standards and things and expectations of how things would have been. And so we look at Lydia as a confirmation of the calling of women and the importance of women and telling their stories, that it's not an exception to the rule, that it's not anything that should be unusual. The reason it's unusual is because of our own ways that we've gotten in the way that we talk about women, in the way that we treat women within the life of the church. But early on, we would see that a woman was included. We, as First Baptist of Williamsburg, are a church that affirms women in ministry in all roles. This is, we believe that God is calling, can call anyone into ministry, to service. And so we have historically run into some issues with some of our own denomination locally because of this. But we would see someone like Lydia who was able to open the door to Paul's message and hear it and to share it with others and be able to have her whole household baptized. Now notice, if you remember, a couple weeks ago we talked about the story of Cornelius, and Cornelius got a lot of credit for doing the same thing. But when we talk about Cornelius, it's all about the importance of reaching people and how he was able to save his household and how God was speaking to him. And then we get to Lydia. Sometimes they just ignore that she was leading and just talk about other things and the ways that women can be involved. And so all that to say, we see Lydia as a confirmation of what we believe in terms of God's calling of women into ministry and leadership position. It's there. The other thing, though, that stands out is she was wealthy. And if you read, most of the Gospels, you read early church, a lot of times it seemed like money was the issue and that, you should sell everything you have and give it to the poor. Nobody's a literalist if they don't actually do that, right? Or they would talk about how money is just the root of all evil, and we hear all these different things. What we see with Lydia was that she was wealthy, but instead of her wealth becoming a barrier, it became an opportunity. It is not wrong, I believe scripturally, to be wealthy. It's not wrong to have resources. What is wrong is to allow those resources to become more important than following Christ, to allow those resources to become a burden, to become something we are so worried about holding on to that we fail to move forward when we can. And so when we see that she was used in the story in this way, it's important to see that, Paul was not silly. Ministers would be silly to say, well, if you've got money, you're not welcome here. But sometimes we do want to make it seem as if everything has to be exactly equal in terms of financial things. And Lydia would show that maybe that's not always the case. Now, it is just important to see this because then later on, in the very next story, we're going to see a slave girl who is healed, who is Paul is able to cure her of one of her issues. And so we see within just a short amount of time somebody who is very wealthy and then someone who has absolutely no social status, both being healed, both being seen, both being welcomed, both being used by God. And so when we see all of these things happening time and time again, the story of the gospel is this, that God is using all kinds of people in all kinds of ways. And ultimately, we are the ones who often get in the way of celebrating how God is able to move. Jesus comes pretty consistently with this message of how we are created and how we are supposed to care for those who are hurting and oppressed and poor. And we take all that and we hear this good news about how it is now not just the Jews, but it's the Gentiles. And so it is open to all people. And then we come trying to compartmentalize what is happening. And the more that we do that, the more we get in our own way of seeing what is actually possible. And so with Lydia, you see a female who was wealthy and by all accounts, should have been an unlikely person to be a part of the story. But Jesus often uses the most unlikely, and in doing so, exposes our own issues. So if we're looking at this story, I would ask the questions of ourselves: what barriers have we placed that are keeping other people from serving, or from keeping ourselves from serving? What things have we said, well, God would never use, or God could never, and what have we allowed to buy into to say that those are not the kind of people who God would use? Because time and time again, we see, especially in the early church, that God was using people from such a wide variety of backgrounds. He was breaking down all the barriers. He was doing all the things to get rid of what we had seen as being how things had to be. And because of that, as this was beginning to open up, we see more and more people have an opportunity to see the good news. It is Jesus who brings everyone to the table. It is male and female. It is rich and poor. It is Jew and Gentile. It is any type of person that you can think of as a person who is wanted and welcomed and called by God. And so our role is not based on our own able to do things, our own ability to do things. It's on our ability to be faithful in where God has called us. We are thankful for people like Lydia, who saw this opportunity in front of her and decided that following Jesus, that entering into this new lifestyle was going to be an opportunity to welcome more people to the table. And so she took a risk. By doing this, it may have been bad for business. It may have been bad for business to all of a sudden be welcoming in the lowliest of people and people outside of their social class. It may have been a risk to business for her to stand up and try to lead, but she knew that following Jesus was the most important thing. And when you find out that Jesus is the most important thing, you're willing to deal with a whole lot of other things, and you're willing to risk a whole lot of other things. And so I'm probably doing a great disservice to her story, but we are so thankful for folks like Lydia in Scripture who remind us that God has called us all to be a part of this story, that we're able to celebrate what God is doing, and we're able to use it as we move forward. I hope that you're having a great week. I say it every week. I mean it every week. It is a busy and exciting time around here, but we've got just so many good things happening. And so we are holding on hope that God will continue to be faithful, that we will continue to be faithful in doing those things. And the end of this year and this summer is just going to be an absolute blast. And so checking in, if you've not visited with us in a while, we would certainly love to see you. Visit with us if you can check in just online. We are grateful that you're watching, however it may be, and hope that you have a very good week.